Today, we are going to get into the U.S. Constitution. But we're not just going to read the text. Nope. We're going to explore its core design. Because it's a system that was actually born from a pretty spectacular failure. A system engineered to be both powerful and, honestly, a little paranoid. And if you can understand that design, you can understand how American government works today. So to really get the Constitution, you first have to understand the total disaster that came right before it, the Articles of Confederation. I mean, just imagine a government that couldn't collect taxes to pay its own debts. It couldn't even enforce its own laws. You had states printing their own money, acting like they were rival countries. It was pure chaos. So the framers knew they needed to create a government with some real authority, but they were absolutely terrified of creating a new king. The challenge was, how do you build something with teeth, but also put it on a leash to keep it from becoming a tyrant? So, how'd they pull it off? Well, the first brilliant idea they baked into the system was something called federalism. Think of it as the vertical divide, this idea that power would be shared between the national government way up here and the state governments down here. Now, this is key. Federalism isn't some neat, clean line in the sand. It's actually designed to create a constant tension, like a permanent tug of war between the national government and the states. It's supposed to be this dynamic and, often messy negotiation over where one's power ends and the other's begins. So what happens when they actually clash? When a state law and a federal law are in direct conflict? Well, the Constitution has a tiebreaker built right in. It's called the Supremacy Clause, and it's pretty simple. It says that when there's a conflict over an issue the Constitution gives to the feds, the federal law wins, period. This is what makes sure that on the really big stuff, the country acts as one unified nation, not 50 different ones. But the framers worried, what if the federal government gets too big for its britches? So they built in a powerful counterbalance, the 10th Amendment. This is the Reserved Powers Amendment. It basically says that any power that isn't specifically handed over to the federal government is kept or reserved for the states or for the people. You can think of it like a constitutional firewall, there to protect the state's authority. And here you can see that vertical split in action. The federal government has its specific, enumerated powers. These are the big picture items like declaring war or coining a national currency. But most of the things that affect your day-to-day life, like setting up schools or running the local police force, those powers are reserved for the states. Okay, so we've got that vertical division of power between the nation and the states, but the framers didn't stop there, not even close. They also split power horizontally, right through the middle of the federal government itself. This, of course, is the famous separation of powers. The idea here was pretty straightforward. Prevent any one part of the new federal government from getting too dominant. So what did they do? They split its power into 3 distinct branches. You've got the legislative branch, that's Congress. Their job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive branch, led by the president, and their job is to enforce those laws. And finally, the judicial branch, the courts, who get to interpret what the laws actually mean. But just separating the powers wasn't enough. I mean, that's just part of it. The real genius is how these branches are literally forced to collide with each other. This whole system of checks and balances isn't designed for everyone to get along and sing campfire songs. It's engineered for friction. It forces them to compromise and negotiate, because no single branch can get anything done all by itself. The process of just making a law is the perfect example of this in action. So Congress can pass a bill, but it's not a law just yet. It has to go to the president, who can flat out kill it with a veto. That's a huge check on Congress's power. But the fight isn't over. Congress has its own check on the president. They can try to override that veto. And look at the bar they set for that override. A 2/3 supermajority, not just in one chamber, but in both the House and the Senate. That is an incredibly high hurdle, and it's high on purpose. It means that to pass a law over the president's objections, you need this massive, broad consensus. It can't just be a narrow party line squeaker. So why all this complexity, right? Why this tangled web of checks and balances and divided powers? To really get that, you have to look at the core philosophy that was driving the entire design. The framers were not optimists. Not at all. They were stone-cold realists. They had this really pragmatic, almost skeptical view of human nature. They knew from history and from their own lives that power corrupts, and that even people with the best intentions will abuse authority if you let them have it unchecked. James Madison just nailed it in Federalist 51. He wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." And the implication there is just so clear. Since people aren't angels, you need a government. But And this is the crucial part, because the people who are in the government aren't angels either. You have to build controls into the government itself. So this was their solution. At the end of the day, the number one goal was to protect liberty. And the method to get there was to diffuse power, spread it out, break it up. Federalism and the separation of powers were the tools they used to solve this timeless problem of human ambition. They built a government that was actually strong enough to work, but they structured it so it would be incredibly difficult for that government to turn its power against the people. Okay, so this is way more than just a history lesson. This 18th century design is basically the operating system we are all still running on today. And understanding how it was built is absolutely crucial for making any sense of what's happening in politics right now. And that leaves us with a really critical question for our time. The framers designed this system of friction, this system of diffused power, to force people to find consensus and to prevent tyranny. But in today's hyperpolarized world, does that system still work? Does it still force compromise? Or does it just create total gridlock? That's the enduring challenge of the Constitution's design.